There it is. Okay.
Getting the whole song.
Yeah. Hey, just enjoy the groove, man. All right now. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the viewers out there. This is the Trestle Board Talks. Today is going to be a good one. It's our third segment of the Constitutional Corner, and we're looking forward to having an open discussion about a number of different topics, but more specifically about our Constitution or the Masonic Constitution in general. I am one of your co-hosts, Brother Trey, and I'm joined by my brothers, Brother Aaron, Brother Justin, and Brother Raul. And quick disclaimer, the views and opinions on this show are just that. They are our own views and opinion. They do not in any way reflect any lodge that we may hold membership in or the Grand Lodge in which we may also be a member of. So with that, let's get it.
Yeah, buddy. Aaron, your constitutional corner, sir.
Yes, sir.
Do it. Okay, so look, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna try to shorten this up a little bit. I think I did something that's gonna help us a little. So for those people who are interested, I'm sure we can post. We have a study outline that's long. I'm not gonna read that whole thing. There's also some homework that is sort of the reading list that is relevant to what we're going to talk about today. So I'll give you guys those things, and then perhaps we can give you those also on top of the study outline if you're interested. So for the reading list for segment 3, there's for this Constitution. I'll just say it, and then we'll try to figure out how to tie it in for you. So
Sure.
for us, Article 2, 1D is membership of the Grand Lodge. Article 3, the whole thing, Grand Lodge power and authority. Article 5, the entire thing, especially 2, 3, and 8, ballot, Grand Master term limits, nomination while absent. Article 16, A and 3C, Grand Board of Directors, composition and plurality voting. Chapter 3, Section 47. This is purely for contrast, lodge, worshipful master installation requirements. They are different from Grand Lodge officers, but it's here just so that you can have that contrast and conversation. So officers' duties articles, duties of Grand Master, Deputy Grand Master, Grand Wardens, Grand Treasurer, Grand Secretary. And then Article 15, Section 1, Grand Lectures Authority. Ooh, you know what? We're going to lift that. We're going to leave that alone. Unless we have a Grand Lecturer who wants to speak to it. So
Oh, no one.
we'll just jump in from here. So let's get it. Welcome to this edition, segment 3 of the Constitutional Corner. I am Brother Aaron Bullock. We're going to move on from last segment, the what and why of our Constitution, into the who and how that keeps our jurisdiction functioning, specifically the Grand Lodge officers and their elections, how and what that consists of. By the end of this segment, you should know exactly who composes the Grand Lodge, how elections are supposed to run, what qualifications are actually required, and where the Constitution is silent. So you can separate custom from constitutional law, and those things are important. I want to talk about that a little bit too, even if we're not explicit in this work. I think we should talk about that because it does matter. If you have a copy of your Constitution, it's great to have it in your hand. Here's the disclaimer. We just talked about this. Different jurisdictions are going to have slightly different constitutions, but the general issues will be, the topics will be the same. How those things are handled may be different. And if you're in a jurisdiction that sounds a little different from the one we're going to be talking about here, we'll try to keep it general, but the important thing is that you do know your Constitution and you know how your specific jurisdiction operates. That's going to be very important. All right, here we go. Part 1. Who is the Grand Lodge? For us, the primary reference is Article 2, Section 1D. This defines membership of the Grand Lodge. In plain terms, it includes your Grand Lodge officers alongside the masters and wardens of chartered lodges. Plus, in this case, past masters as well, not in all cases. Who votes in the Grand Lodge elections and on Grand Lodge business? And who may stand for offices that the Constitution opens to election? So these are really key questions that this section of this conversation should be able to answer. Part 2, why officers matter, the authority behind roles. The primary reference here is Article 3. It's the whole thing, the Grand Lodge and its powers and authority. Before we talk about ballots, we need the backdrop of this whole thing. So Article 3 lays out the sovereign powers of the Grand Lodge, granting charters, enforcing constitutional law, and ensuring uniform governance throughout the jurisdiction. It is the why behind every office and every election.
And let me add something real quick.
Yeah.
So as we're talking about the laws, the who's and the hows, and let's just say that we are convening for an annual session. The question I would have to the audience then would be, how many Grand Lodges compose, how many subordinate lodges compose a Grand Lodge? In other words, what constitutes quorum, right? And we have to, the reason why I asked that is this, it's 3 is the answer, right? So imagine that there was only 3 subordinate lodges that showed up to represent. That constitutes quorum. Now think about this. If we were voting on an issue, 3 lodges can decide the fate of the whole jurisdiction.
That's right.
So I just wanted to point that out and just to interject that as we circumvent through the rest of it.
I think that's great. So I'm gonna skip through a little bit. I'm gonna check my own work. Give me 1 second here. Because I don't want to skip over any of this stuff. So why don't we do this? Why don't we? I tried to design this segment for a little more conversation. So let's do this. Let's talk about part 1. Who is in the Grand Lodge? For us here, I think this is good for us to talk about, right? For us here, it is masters of lodges. It is wardens of lodges. And it is also, for us here, past masters of lodges, right? Those are, for us, the voting members of the Grand Lodge. And those are the people who can be members of the, elected members of the Grand Lodge in any capacity. Those are the people who will, if they're in those places, have authority over how the governance of our organization, our jurisdiction operates. That's not true everywhere. Justin, you want to talk about that a little?
No, I mean, I think as a general rule of thumb, that's it. What you just kind of outlined, whether a past master or not has a vote, kind of irrelevant, but
Not always true.
I think it's interesting, that the junior warden, the most junior elected officer in the lodge, has a critical say in how the Grand Lodge is governed. So I think by having it this way, you get an equal spread of experience. In some cases, experienced members, past masters, have been around for a while, masters that are aware of the critical issues, and the junior warden that is in a sense learning, right, and having those conversations probably with the others. But I think it's important, and I don't know if all lodges do this, but when resolutions that are going to be determined at your annual session, grand communication, whatever you call it, those members of those lodges have a say in, or at least can give an opinion on what is the general consensus of and feeling. So although they are the voting members, right, I think a lodge that doesn't discuss these resolutions prior to going in there and voting is kind of doing the craft a disservice. So a really good and some Grand Lodges require that. Like, you do have to read the resolutions and gather that input. But I know some lodges that don't. And, it's important to have that feedback.
I agree, though. I agree. Guys, anything else on that?
Yeah, I think, and this is just, for my edification, and really, I guess others who are thinking the same thing. It kind of feels like we went straight to voting specifically, but I think it's important, as we're going to get to next, is understanding the powers and authorities. Right, the executive versus legislative, because that legislative is what you're talking about when we're getting about voting, and I think it should probably be flip-flopped for the listeners to kind of understand why you're voting, why they're voting members in the first place, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So look, one of the things I think is true, this part of this conversation is, all of this conversation really is about power, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's about power. Who has it? Who has ultimate power? And then who has temporary power? And who has the authority to move things around? Exactly right.
That's the interlude.
Who that? Rihanna?
Um,
Go ahead and add that out.
right. And for that, I think that the reason that I put it up at the top is because I think it's important for us to understand that the body represented by your masters and your wardens hold the power to move the organization, right? Like
Yep.
that your vote is that power. And that's not small. And I think it can be overlooked. I think it can be misunderstood. And that's a thing that we need to understand, right? Your Grand Lodge is not it's not just the officers of the Grand Lodge. Your Grand Lodge is the body of the Grand Lodge, which is the constituent components, the voting members of, which are the masters and the wardens, and in cases the past masters, right? But for me, those are the masters.
Yeah, brothers have to understand that the only time, and I don't say this as disrespect to the Grand Master. This is law. This is constitutional law. The only time the Grand Master can make arbitrary decisions for the Grand Lodge is at recess. During Grand Session, the membership decides on the collective outcome of said Grand Lodge. To your point, as
Right.
far as having the power and ability to make changes, we've talked about that a couple of times.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, knowledge goes a long, long way. Now, if you have an understanding of what's going on in your jurisdiction and what you like and what you don't, and you understand that you have power, then you understand that you can affect change, right? You can accept what is, or you can affect change. And there are processes by which you can do that during that grand session when your vote is supposed to be all powerful, right? Like that, I think that really matters. And then to your point, Trey, there's a distinction between the body and what the next topic is the officers of the lodge. That's different. That's different. Those are different. So let's talk about that for a second. So the officers of the lodge are the Grand Master, the Deputy Grand Master, Senior and Junior Wardens, right? And then
So the elected seven for us is the Grand Master, Deputy Grand Master,
The bigger master.
Senior and Junior Warden, the financial officers,
That's Terry.
and then Grand Lecturer. Those are the
Right.
elected
Yeah.
seven.
correct, right?
Yeah.
And then we have, I want to call them subordinate officers, but the
Appointed.
appointed officers.
Absolutely, yeah. Which is a talking point.
It is.
People don't understand the difference and
Right.
what that really means and who appoints who.
Why don't you talk about it?
Well, I mean, just to keep it really simple and really vanilla, in the Grand Lodge, the Grand Master has the autonomy to appoint his Grand Lodge officers, right? He is the one that signs the letter for appointee letters. Now, he can delegate that authority to the Deputy Grand Master, and in our case, the wardens pick their stewards. Okay, so, but again, not every Grand Lodge, I think Justin can give us a different flavor, but not every Grand Lodge operates under that same auspice that the Grand Master delegates that authority to other Grand Lodge officers.
I mean, the delegation, if he delegates it, he is trusting that that decision is going to be properly made. But I think we're kind of getting into the waters of the progressive line, right? And we talked about that a little bit earlier. And different Grand Lodges have different progressive lines. Some of that is, in one state that I'm a member of, the Grand Master appoints the Junior Grand Steward, and that is where the progressive line starts. So he sits from Junior Grand Steward all the way up to the Grand Master, and that takes a number of years. In another jurisdiction I'm a member of, that progressive line starts at the Junior Grand Warden. They have a very interesting way in how they provide recommendees for that seat. So every year, the Junior Grand Warden recommendee comes from a board, and it comprises of all the current sitting elected grand officers, in addition to all the past Grand Masters. They will provide a recommendation for that. They call it the white smoke meeting, like the Pope, they call it the white smoke meeting. But that doesn't mean that they are guaranteed to be elected, right? Because you could be on the floor and here is our Junior Grand Warden our recommended our recommended member for that seat. Anybody can stand up and nominate somebody else.
The Constitution.
The Constitution, and it happens. It happens. I was at one, and we had the recommendee, and from the cheap seats, somebody called out some dude's name, and it threw a huge wrench in the engine, right? But still, that was within their right,
And it went to ballot.
and it went to ballot, and it went to ballot.
That's the thing is, I think brothers just have to understand that in this jurisdiction, our specific jurisdiction, that a past master can run for every seat, every elected seat. Right now, there are some variations in different jurisdictions where you have to be, let's say, to be the Grand Master, you have to be the Deputy Grand Master.
Sure.
That's not true here. A past master from the floor can run for Grand Master.
I'm gonna throw something in.
Okay.
Why a past master can do it and not a master or warden?
We've never discussed it. And again, until recently, right, this has never come up. And this is kind of why we're talking about, that's why we have the Constitutional Corner.
So we're gonna talk about this a little bit. There has been conversation in our jurisdiction about this, right? And the parliamentarian has had to weigh in recently.
Absolutely.
And although we'll get into it a little deeper, there is no constitutional stipulation around the concept of past master.
Yeah, but there's a cultural stipulation that prevents it.
There has been a consideration that this is what is true for a long period of time. Now, we have had precedents that have stood up against this, but that doesn't change, I think, the psychological culture around it. But I think it's important that we have the conversation so people can know what is true and what is not true. And also, there is, I think, a great deal of power in our Constitution and the fact that it is a living document and that you can alter it and that you should alter it to reflect what is true. There are some things that are fine, I think, to have as, some like common law, things that we just accept to be true. There are some things that I think must be written. They should be written for clarity's sake, right?
And in some cases it is. And an example of that is in some jurisdictions, you need to be a past master of that Grand Lodge.
Right.
Yeah.
You need to be a past master of that Grand Lodge. And if you were a past master in another Grand Lodge jurisdiction, you moved and you were highly qualified, you weren't able to run.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah, but to both of you guys' point, though, and just think about it like this. I think that most Grand Lodges, and I'm not going to cap it to 1 or 2 Grand Lodges. I think most Grand Lodges are going to more autocratic societies, not democratic societies, right? The Constitution has been and always has been an afterthought of most Grand Lodges. Is that fair to say?
I think
just I've been a member of a few different jurisdictions, and I can see that manifesting itself in various jurisdictions, that the Constitution merely is a gift. It's just was an eye candy.
it is ornamentation.
It is very much ornamentation.
So let's anchor in on that a little bit. You're saying it's more of an autocratic. What are the dangers in that? Right? What do you see the dangers?
Look at our society. It's the same thing as our society, right? Look at right now. Our current leadership in our society has been from Governor Gavin Newsom to everybody. Everybody can see it. It's becoming an autocratic, right? It's very much a dictatorship. And when you have a dictatorship, what happens? You have mutiny.
I have had this conversation on the floor of my lodge with past masters and other members of the lodge as to whether or not the spirit of masonry, of this thing we do, is democratic or autocratic, right? And I can tell you historically, there is an understanding that masonry has been built upon democratic processes to the extent that other organizations, countries, have modeled themselves after our democratic processes to be the most democratic that they could possibly be. But to argue the point of the opposite side of my argument, our Constitution defines autocracy, except for during grand session.
For the most part,
right? It gives an autocratic power to the Grand Master that is, according to the Constitution, undeniable. To the extent that you could go to a grand session, the whole body. We just talked about the power that the body has. The body could go into grand session and they could say, we want to change X, Y through Z, and we're going to vote on it, and we're going to make it law. And the Grandmaster during those days doesn't have any power to do anything about it. But when the gavel sounds and the power is handed back, he can wipe it all out.
He could. But he also has to come back the next Grand Lodge and justify. Now,
That's true, but
again,
he's still
it'll be a dance at that point.
right.
Because we get back in session and it'll be a dance. To buy
Yes.
the craft will vote. Somebody will write a resolution, obviously. It will hit the floor if approved. And that autocratic piece in the recess, if it's not approved, then what? Right? It never hits the floor.
So one of the things that we're going to talk about term limits, right? If you have a grandmaster that's in for a year, you could have a constitution that gives them autocratic powers. It won't matter because they'll be gone. And the next guy will come in, right? And if that next guy is in alignment with the craft will get their way. If you have a term limit that goes for 2 years or 3 years or whatever, and it is arguable that it is hard to do anything in a year. It's hard to enact a vision in a year, right?
Right.
And so
Masters would agree.
for having longer term limits. But if you have them, then you have the opportunity to have an autocrat stand in who will be more interested, and maybe sometimes even rightfully so, their vision than the craft's vision, right? And so the dance you're talking about is during these few days in grand session, the craft's going to have whatever they want, but then it's going to go back to whatever the elected.
What's interesting, what if we had, and think about it like in our society, in our government, within our society, what if we had midterms?
Right.
Because and I say this because, and think about this is a real thing. Other jurisdictions have multiple sessions in a year. They don't just have one session. They'll have what they call like a mid-year session or mid-session. Some people refer to it as, and then they have their main session. The main session is a lot more smooth because the mid-session, a lot of the administrative stuff is done.
UGLA definitely does that.
Yeah. So again, if we had midterm elections, I think it would force people to be more cognizant of what they're doing and how they're doing it.
I think that for this to be a truly democratic system, you would have to have midterms, right? But you would also have to address the Constitution that would say something like, if the body votes for something during grand session, the grandmaster is the servant of the will. It is not the other way around, right? It's not the grandmaster's will and pleasure, it's the craft's will and pleasure, and the grandmaster would be then obligated to honor the vote of the craft, right? And then maybe then, and if he doesn't do that, then there are some penalties or whatever. But I think if you don't do that, if you leave your constitution such that it gives ultimate power to the grandmaster, they will always be able to negate or wipe away whatever the will of the craft is, if that's what their pleasure is. And again, to be clear, look, if you have a jurisdiction of knucklebrains, right, who want to do, I don't know, but they decide that Masonic dress is socks and underwear, right? And the grandmaster is not a knucklebrain. He's like, yeah, okay, you guys got that for 2 days. Y'all can walk around here for socks and underwear till y'all voted it in. But when I get gavel, we're going back to Masonic dress, right? And that's an extreme version, but like we could certainly look at populations that are maybe not that equipped to govern or to make certain judgments, right? And you have leadership that is better equipped. Their vision is stronger. They have a longer view of the future, and they may be doing things to ensure that the order remains, right? So,
kind of depends on one jurisdiction that I'm a member of. It really depends on how the vote goes. So there are only 1 year term limits, but it's interesting. They have 1 year term limits for the grandmaster, and depending on how something is voted on will determine whether it goes into effect or if the next year it needs to carry over. So for example, something hits the floor, the craft votes, it's a 2/3 majority. It's a 2/3 majority. It automatically passes. If it only gets 51% or higher, then it carries over to the next year, which means there's a new grandmaster there to work there. So it's kind of like the work is segmented. If there's a topic that the craft isn't really convinced on yet, it will be retabled at the next annual communication, entire year later when you have a new grandmaster there.
I'm gonna jump around a little bit. So we just talked about who the officers were, right? And some of the authority from the Grand Lodge perspective is obviously very important. The Grand Lodge is granting charters. They can create new subordinate lodges, right? They are the rule of law. So if there's a constitutional question, these Grand Lodge officers are empowered to decide.
Interpret.
Wait a minute, yeah, hold on, because this goes back to but it goes back to legislative and executive, right? The
Mhm.
legislative is the body in which they are, voting. Those are the voting members, but then the executive, being, the grand master in this particular scenario, is specifically in charge of how the law is carried out, right? And like
Right.
enforcing how that is carried out. And the ultimate law, uh, and I have a little disagreement about what you just said there. The law is the Constitution. The law
That's
is what's written. So it's
that's right.
not the will and pleasure of any individual. Is
Oh,
what does the paper say, and
it's
then how
supposed
is
to
it
be
carried
that.
out?
Right.
Yeah,
It's
well, that's
supposed
what
to
it
be
is.
that.
But if
Yeah. We've all experienced, we've seen it where you have leaders inside and outside of Masonry who, as you say, like the Constitution is an ornament, right? It doesn't really, it's not
no,
used as a force,
window dressing.
right? It is the will of the leader who will tell you what the Constitution is, even if the Constitution doesn't say that, right?
And that's why I think it's important for us to have. Sorry, I just got to say that. That's why I think it's important for us to have these conversations like this
Right.
to educate, so others understand how things are supposed to be, so they
Right.
can understand what they are empowered to do. Because information, it can be a weapon of good or evil, depending on whose hands you put it in.
Right.
And I think like it's important for us to have the conversation about just the basic mechanics of legislation, the executive branch, how that works in masonry specifically. And then there was one other thing for I guess for all the listeners too, if you haven't looked up what autocracy is, it's like when one person rules or governs a particular system or whatnot. So yeah, sorry.
Emperors. Hey,
You trying to get canceled?
be careful when you speak about loud.
Yeah.
So the other thing that
Hey, I
this
love my
talks about,
country.
the other thing this talks about, and I think this is incredibly important, right? Like why we have a Grand Lodge, because this is
Yeah.
that's a big question. Like, why do we even have a Grand Lodge, right? One of the biggest things that we talk about here is the responsibility of the Grand Lodge and its officers to ensure uniform governance throughout the jurisdiction. And I'm going to extend to say beyond governance, uniform process, that we do things the same way, that we look the same way, that we look like an entity, a thing, right? I think that is huge. And I think we've talked about this a little bit, right? But that's a big deal, right? Like that your subordinate lodges are doing their ritual work the same way, right? And that they have the same standards for things like proficiency.
I think the trace point, though, just kind of backing up on that, the Constitution, and it only spells it out one or two places. It needs to be spelled out executive and legislative, and I think it just it gives it a clear picture, right, to identify who has what, because it's not it is written in very plain language, and the shells and shoulds, which is very, as you guys all know, gray. But if it had executive and legislative powers, then it would delineate who's where. And it does that in a couple places in the Constitution, but it doesn't do it throughout the Constitution to give it a clear, defined expectation.
Yeah.
Especially for a new Mason. A new Mason would be confused.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think even to that point too, like even, and maybe this is something for, another segment to help our readers, is like the way that our Constitution is put together, like physically in the book, right, can also be confusing in the sense of you're not really, it's difficult to track what they're really talking about and who they're talking about. I've heard people reference like, the duties of the senior warden for the Grand Lodge is the same as, the subordinate lodges and so forth, so on. So it's not really written in a concise manner. You have to understand. But which brings me to my next question. And it's on this topic as well. Jurisprudence, right? Jurisprudence. What's up with jurisprudence? What is that supposed to be?
Right.
It's an A file thing that's used for better lack of terms of governance.
Check and
Yeah.
balance.
Right? It is put in a file And I'll kind of let that hang there. But what I will say to your point, Trey, and back again on legislative and executive is that, and you always hear this argument, right? And I think even our last things, one of the brothers was chatting in the chat, and he was saying something about Masonic code and constitution, and there's a difference.
Yep.
Right?
Hmm.
There's a difference. We don't, not always, but in our
Yeah.
constitution, there is broken down Masonic code and constitution.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's where it gets sticky, right? Because you're referencing, and if a brother's not as familiar, and you say Masonic code, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" It's the Constitution, and then some people blend those
Hmm.
two things together, and they're not. They're distinctly separate things. But again, we have to label it a little bit more. I don't want to say user friendly, right? That's always kind of just weird to say anyway. I just say that legislative and executive. Make it very distinct. Like this, no, no driving. This is what it is. Boom.
Do we make
Yeah.
it too hard to change it? Right? Are we a victim of putting so many processes in place that it never gets revised because everything requires the body to speak,
Yeah.
or
I-
at least
I think that's good in the sense of, there's a process to reform it, and it shouldn't, in my opinion, be something that's easy to change. It should take some time, some thought, and some concurrence, across the board, and go through a vetting process, will you, before those changes are enacted. But I think more importantly is everyone has to read it. They have to read it, right? And not just read it. You got to read it to understand. And that's not everybody's forte, right? There's
sure.
it's like written in law, like you're a lawyer, right? So that makes it challenging. But it's such a foundational and fundamental document that I just think, I'll tell you, coming in, hey, there was just read your Constitution. Well, okay, what's that? Yeah, it's this little book. So someone just coming in from the outside and not being educated in I guess formal processes of governance, I'll call it that, formal governance, it can be very, very challenging and disheartening to understand. And that's why, again, we have this constitutional corner, right? Because we think it's just that important to have the discussions on it. So I
Yeah.
digress.
Look, I'm going to jump around a little bit to qualifications. Before we get into elections, I want to talk about qualifications and then duties of, right? And then we can talk about elections. So, section 4 of this speaks about who is qualified to be a Grand Lodge officer, right? The Constitution explicitly speaks to a candidate needing to be a member in good standing, right? They need to be of a lodge under this jurisdiction, right? They must comply with Article 5, which I will read. This is procedures and acceptance. The Constitution it is not written in the Constitution in any clause or in Article 5 or anywhere else. It does not imply or suggest or state that you must be a past master to be a Grand Lodge officer. Just contrasting lodge level office requirements, installation of a worshipful master is a little different from that of, in a subordinate lodge. In order to be a worshipful master in this jurisdiction, you have to have been a worshipful master or a warden, right? And you must have shown proficiency for that.
Aaron, what's your opinion on that?
Which part?
On must be or does not have to be a past master. What's your position?
I actually just fought this fight. To be honest with you, part of the struggle for me is a really interesting word in Hebrew around struggle. I won't give you that, but the basic concept is in Judaism, you almost have an obligation to argue with your rabbi. And the reason for that is conceptually, in engaging in conversation that could be uncomfortable or even have some dissent, that on the other side of it, if you commit to that, you should come out with wisdom. You should come out with a correct answer, and you should come out with wisdom. And you might even shine light on for both parties, right? Like hopefully that's what happens. Struggle in for law. And for me, I think of that the Constitution is the word of God, but that the Constitution is the law of the people as decided by the people, and that the Constitution is a living document that can and should be changed as per the will of people. But when the Constitution says something, then we should say that the Constitution says it, and we should honor that, right? And if we say, well, the Constitution doesn't say it, but we think it's this way, yeah, I got it. But the Constitution is the scaffolding by which you define yourself as an organization. And I argue that we do.
Is there an unwritten rule that you have to be a past master?
Right. And so there is an unwritten, I'm not even call it a law. I'm going to say it's a suggestion. There are people in our jurisdiction who feel that that's what's true, right? That you got to be a past master, right?
I would agree with that.
But here's
Yes,
here's
the way
what's
we
interesting. Okay, so I love that you said always. One of the reasons that I took this struggle up is because we have mostly done it that way. But a couple of years ago, we didn't do it that way. And we've not done it that way more than one time, right?
Isn't it going back to what we were just talking about? Who's the CD Grand Master? I think Justin kind of said that. Like the tone changes, right?
It does change. But still, when we talk about how things operate and how things are defined, I think it's important for us to define them. Right.
Correct.
And beyond just the will or the personality of an individual who will come and go, right? That we know what this is. And when we set precedent, somebody said this earlier that our organization essentially is a business, right?
Yeah.
And this business, like a country or anything else, is defined by its bylaws and by its constitutions, by the rules that we set up for ourselves. And I think it is important for us to not be casual about how we apply them, right? And so if you have an unwritten law or an idea, it's not written, and then you do something that changes that, you set a precedent for it, then is it still a law? Is it still unwritten? You know what I'm saying? Like, has the craft maybe changed their mind because you did it differently? And so how I feel about it is this: I respect both of them. I respect both the Constitution and the will of the craft. And what my contention is that we should, if we feel strongly about anything, specifically to this issue, that we should write a resolution and that we should craft it into the Constitution that is true, because I can support it. And there are lots of reasons to support it. There are lots of reasons to support why you should be a past master before you take on the responsibilities of a role in the Grand Lodge, right? Like it would be really hard for me to rationally argue against that. It's hard for me to argue against, right? But so that I think that we should, if we want that, like if you want anything that is not actually written into your Constitution, endeavor to redraw your Constitution. That's your right, and I think it's your obligation. That's how I feel about it.
Should you need to be a past master of your Grand Lodge?
Yeah.
Or any past master? And how is past master defined? And the only reason why I bring those points up, right, is because how a past master is defined is jurisdictional.
Yeah.
And may have just been elected and installed, and that's it. Or is it 365 years?
It changes. Now, I can give you a personal example. When I came over to California in 2009, you know what I mean, just moved in the state, period. I came from a different jurisdiction. Here's the thing. I sat in the lodge with a past master jewel on that happened to have a reef on it. Man, they were, it was, you thought I would have, slapped my mother or something, right? It was one of those things like, why do you have a reef? You're not a Grand Lodge officer. Remember, I just got there.
Right.
So I'm just like, well, my grandmaster is, at the time, Dr. Dave Vaughn. He did our degree. He signed my certificate. This was the requirements. This was one of the things that in said jurisdiction we could wear. And then I come here and it's like, no, we can't wear that unless you're a Grand Lodge officer. So those distinct differences of what you're talking about is, do we have to be 365 days? Do we have to, what's our regalia look like? And that's a constant fight right now. There's a couple past masters that just hate our inconsistencies in how past masters dress. So there's a lot.
And just and the reason why I bring those things up is, it maybe by not stating it gives the jurisdiction a little bit more flexibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
By not clearly defining that.
So
just playing devil's advocate.
You also have to then define what a past master is, right?
Yes. And what and where you became a past master at. You start going down a rabbit hole.
Like, what makes you a past master of any given jurisdiction, right? Like, so If, in other words, if you transfer in from another jurisdiction and you are a past master, maybe you've been a past master 5 times, right? But we want you to be a past master. We want you to have been a worshipful master in one of our subordinate lodges because
For 1 year,
that
one
this
time.
is how you understand how we operate.
Sure.
That's the requirement here, that you at least be a worship master, have served as a worship master for a complete term.
Is that something that's written, or is that an unwritten?
That's written.
Yeah.
In order to be eligible to be considered as a past master. Because remember, the Grand Master signs your past master certificate. Now, it's funny to say this and it was painful to deal with, but there was a lodge recently where the worship master tried to make honorary past masters. Now, it only flew for the meeting and then it got kiboshed right after the meeting. But just that's to Justin's point and to all you guys' point, especially Justin, that happens. Like, people just kind of like, and I hate to say this, just kind of making up stuff.
Oh,
Mhm.
100%.
Well, what is a past master in our jurisdiction? What makes you a past master?
Well, I mean, the degree
Which
primarily. Or there's a specific past master degree that you
Right.
take.
when do you
take that? You
when do
take
you
that before you take office. Well, right when you take office and you get elected in, the next thing to do after you get installed is the past master degree.
Does the Constitution define a past master as someone who sits in the chair for 11 months?
No, but that's where the shells and shoulds come in.
Sure.
Because it says something to the effect that to be eligible, essentially, that you have to sit or serve the term as a worship master, but it doesn't spell it all the way out.
Okay,
And
so
that's where I say the shells and
This is where
shoulds come
this
in.
is where you get a little ambiguous, right? Because again, if to be a past master, like, okay, when are you a master mason?
Oh, when you get raised from that level to
When
the
you
first
receive your master mason's degree,
third degree, there.
right?
You get raised on the point of that square.
When are you a fellow craft?
Oh, when you get passed.
When you receive your fellow crafts degree,
Absolutely.
and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
Are you a master mason 9 months after? 11 months after? I'm not saying
No.
you go to work, but I'm saying
Right.
as we define what the thing is, when do you become that thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, and I'm gonna do a little devil's advocate too. To your
Yeah.
point, when they do the degree, when the degree is done, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are morally competent.
That is true even as a master mason.
Right, that's true. I mean, that can be true, but
fair.
we're talking specifically as a past master. So you get a degree, you get the degree in December. You get installed, you get the degree.
Yeah.
Now you have no idea what it means to be a past master. Let's just talk general. We're not talking anything else.
No, and I can tell you, no idea.
No idea, right? And I mean, I'm talking to the jewel, to the meaning of the jewel, to the comprehension of the colors of your apron, all of that. The Star of David. There's a whole litany of things. I'm not saying that you do a year and you understand those things, but at least it becomes more clear. And
You understand it better.
You understand it better because you served in the seat. Now you understand what King Solomon did and how he ruled.
Speaking
Because
as
he
a
served.
first-time worshipful master,
Mhm.
near the end of my first year, I can tell you for a fact that I did not understand the job when I received my past master's degree. I was excited about it. That was great, man. I was really excited to be able to move forward into this. I felt really honored. I certainly felt ready.
But you had no idea.
No, you don't.
You had no
can't know
idea.
until you do it.
Because
There's
there's
a lot
lessons.
of work here.
There's lessons within that degree that prepare you not fully, but prepare you to take the seat.
And
Correct.
that makes sense to the
Right.
listeners.
Right. And so what I would suggest is, again, here we go. Let's go back to how we define better our work in the Constitution, right? Because it does make sense, right? It may not make any sense to a person who hasn't done it yet, or a person who just got in. They're going to stand on a really high point and they're going to say, I received a past master's degree, therefore I should be able to do, and by rights, by that definition, that is true. Once you've received that past master's degree, technically you're
You can't give it back.
Yeah, but guess what? Especially, I'm only speaking of this jurisdiction. Until the Grand Master signs your certificate, where is it written?
So but it,
Where,
it's
where's the
not-
where's the proof that you've done a degree?
there's record of it. There's record of it.
Where? Because
Well,
you don't formally open a lodge. You don't formally open a lodge, do you? Absolutely not. Because you can't. There's not.
Is it not an occasional lodge? That's
No.
all.
That is a past master's lodge. You literally do it as a ceremonious degree. Now, there is no written record to say unless the Grand Master signs your certificate,
There's no minutes.
there's no minutes. So how can you justify I'm a past master? It's your word against mine. And I hate to say it like that, but that's what it is.
Sure. So what I would suggest is, because I think that this is a really good point, that the Constitution be crafted to spell this out in very specific terms, right? For all of the degrees, and then for this degree, for the past master's degree.
Sounds like a
Right. You're going to go through this ceremony, and you're going to be given this, said to have been received, a recipient of this degree. In order for you to qualify as a past master, you must not only go through this degree, but you must go through a period of time. And that period of
Right.
time could be 11 months, 12 months, whatever that your term is. And you
Right.
must not miss X amount of meetings, and you must show yourself proficient in these ways. And then finally, you must receive the certificate of a past master from the Grand Master, the sitting Grand Master, that will then make this true. That also, right? And then maybe get into some more specifics as to what a past master in the jurisdiction is, right? Like, is it somebody who transfers in? Do we acknowledge that they have been a past master somewhere else? If it's somebody that we have recognition with, for instance, that's good enough? Or do we say you must, in order to be a past master in our Grand Lodge, recognized as a past master, have sat as a worshipful master of a subordinate lodge and received a past master's degree here in this jurisdiction?
I would agree with all of that except for the mention of the degree. That's me personally, right? Because how many
And we
degrees
all-
are there in the Blue Lodge?
Having been that guy though, right? Coming in
Right.
as a past master from another jurisdiction, when you go for different positions within the Grand Lodge and other subordinate bodies under the umbrella of the Grand Lodge, you have to show your certificate saying that you have completed the degree and that some Grand Master has signed that certificate. You have
Yep.
to show proof. You do, right? In certain arenas. It's not all inclusive, but I can tell you, just like the KYCH, for example, to even be eligible for that, you have to have completed so many different things. One of the things is you have to provide a past master certificate.
I think that's pretty universal.
Yeah,
I think that's universal amongst Masonry.
it is. It has to be because, again, to the argument we were just having or the discussion there, and I was just having, there is no record other than that certificate.
Yep, don't disagree at all. All right,
That's good
so
stuff.
I'm going to talk a little about so who constitutes the Grand Lodge. We spoke about it a little bit briefly. According to our Constitution, Article 2, the Grand Lodge shall have a Grand Master whose address shall be most worshipful, a Deputy Grand Master, a Senior Grand Warden, a Junior Grand Warden, a Grand Treasurer, a Grand Secretary, and a Grand Lecturer who shall be elected annually. Very strong point. When we talk about term limits, we're going to come back to this. So let's stick a pin in that. Who shall be elected annually? Every year, every seat is vacated.
Every year.
Right? There shall be 9 Grand Directors who shall be elected as follows: the Grand Master, Deputy Grand Master, Grand Treasurer, Grand Secretary, by virtue of their respective offices. Says officers, but I think it's offices, and 5 additional members who shall be elected by the Grand Lodge. There shall be the following appointed officers: a Grand Chaplain, whose address shall be very reverent; Senior Grand Deacon, Junior Grand Deacon, Senior Grand Steward, Junior Grand Steward, Grand Pursuivant, Grand Tyler, Grand Architect, Grand Bible Bearer, Grand Standard Bearer, Grand Sword Bearer, Grand Flag Bearer, Grand Keeper of the Archives, Grand Orator, Grand Marshal, and 2 Assistant Marshals, Grand Organist, Grand Historian, Grand Auditor, and 2 Assistant Auditors, Assistant Grand Secretary, District Deputy Grand Masters. These officers, together with the past masters of the jurisdiction and masters and wardens of the several chartered and duly constituted lodges of the representatives thereof, duly elected as hereinafter provided, shall constitute the membership of the Grand Lodge.
It's a lot of guys.
It's a lot of
Yeah.
guys.
A lot of
Right.
appointed.
That's a lot of appointed officers.
It's a lot of appointed officers. So then the next section here then is the process of election. I don't want to get into too much detail on this, but let me just see how much of it should be read.
But the process of election, again, we can I think we can put a pin in that or a bow in it,
I
saying
think
that
so too.
each jurisdiction has a different process, and it is delineated in their constitution. Our jurisdiction does it one way, whereas another jurisdiction, and Justin will speak knowledgeably from being part of two jurisdictions, that they do it differently.
I think that is true, right? And to that also, the same thing goes for your subordinate lodges. But we do things a certain way here. It's probably very similar. Justin, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, well, as far as like how they are elected, you know, so I know one jurisdiction, there's one past master vote per lodge. The other one is just the master, and wardens have the right to vote. So, I mean, there are differences, but at the end of the day, you know, those who are designated to vote are the ones that are making those decisions. Like I spoke about earlier, the hope is that they at least solicit feedback from their lodges prior to casting that vote. At the end of the day, they're going to vote how they're going to vote, but at least making their lodges aware of who's on the ballot, and and knowing that can change, right? Knowing that there could be a nomination from the floor. This is the proposed legislation. Like, what do you guys think about that? I think that getting that feedback from the guys in your lodge is critical, and that is even different, right? In one jurisdiction, apprentices, fellow crafts, and master masons are all dues paying members. If you're a dues paying member, guess what? You're voting in lodge.
Super interesting.
Right? Another one, only master masons have the right to vote. Only master masons have the right to vote. So it's you kind of see the trickle down effect. But at the end of the day, guys that are allowed to vote will vote, and they will make the determination.
So next we're going to talk a little about the duties of these elected officers. And again, this is going to probably vary quite a bit between jurisdictions. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but duties of the Grand Master is the first place that we start. Right? In our Constitution, this is Article 9 is where these duties start, right? It shall be the duty of the Grand Master to preside at all communications of the Grand Lodge, to present at each annual communication a written message setting forth therein all of his official acts, to give a report, right? To constitute all chartered lodges, either in person or by duly authorized representative. To visit each lodge in the jurisdiction at least once during the year, either in person or by duly accredited representative, right? And we know who those people are, right? To exercise a general and careful supervision over the craft, to see that the Constitution and regulations of the Grand Lodge are strictly maintained, to see that the Constitution and regulations of the Grand Lodge are strictly maintained. I want to read it the third time, but I won't. Supported and obeyed, and to discharge all that the Constitution and regulations are supported and obeyed, and to discharge all the necessary functions of the Grand Lodge when that body is not in session.
Yep.
But nothing herein contained shall authorize the Grand Master to do other than carry out the expressed legislative action of this Grand Lodge in accordance with the constitutional requirements and not otherwise. So that's interesting.
Here's what I would say, because it does vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, especially as we refer to the Grand Master's duties and responsibilities. But what I would add as a suggestion, it'll never happen, but just imagine if every jurisdiction followed the seventh landmark to outline the duties and responsibilities of the Grand Master. It would give it a structure, because there's a conference of Grand Master that acts like NATO, and then they do have conferences. When they have conferences, they discuss different issues within the various jurisdictions. But imagine if, to the original point, if every Grand Master's duties and responsibilities in their constitution was aligned specifically with the seventh landmark.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be? What do you guys think about that? Would that standardize some of the processes?
You have it so you can read it?
I have it, right in front of me. The prerogatives of the Grand Master.
Yep.
So I'll read it. Read some of it. I can read all of it.
Yeah.
The seventh landmark, right? Think about this. Seventh landmark says specifically the prerogative of the Grand Master to give dispensation for opening and holding lodges in another landmark. He may grant in virtue of this to sufficient number of Masons the privilege of meeting together and conferring degrees. The lodges thus established are called lodges under dispensation. They are strictly creatures of the Grand Master, created by the authority existing only during the will and pleasure and liability at any moment to be dissolved at his command. They may be continued for a month or 6 months or whatever the period may be that exists therein, and they are indebted to the existence solely to the grace of the Grand Master. Now that's general. There's a few landmarks that deal with the Grand Master, the 8th, the 7th, but the 8th and the 7th, they're back to back, obviously numerically too. But it goes on to talk more about the prerogatives of the Grand Master in the 8th landmark. But what if the duties and responsibilities throughout all jurisdictions were aligned with the 7th and 8th landmark?
I'd like to think that they are.
Ish.
I
think ish.
You know, and this kind of goes to the topic of recognition, and we won't go down that, but I think that if it was discovered that a Grand Lodge was not operating within the general constraints of that landmark and those different landmarks, that, for example, making a Masonette site, that's a pretty universal power of a Grand Master, right?
The 8th goes into some really deep dive stuff.
Right, but like if a Grand Lodge wanted to be recognized and they did not have that power, I would like to think that that would be something that would need to be fixed prior to that recognition being gained. And that's how recognition gets lost between Grand Lodges, because them writing something weird in there, and it's happened, and I'm not going to bring it up here because it's a hot button topic, but there has been times where, you know, recognition has been removed as a result of weird stuff going on in that grant, whether it be the conduct of the Grand Master, and you guys are probably thinking about what state I'm thinking about that has been kind of in recent history. But, you know, I don't know if that's a fact. I don't know exactly how the recognition process works, but I would like to think that if something was missing, omitted, or just plain wrong, that would be a hurdle that would need to be overcome before it'd be granted.
Let me ask you this, and actually all you guys this. If the Grand Master does something egregious, who can remove the Grand Master from office before his term ends?
No.
It's not true. It's not true. The president of the Conference of Grand Masters can remove a Grand Master.
If they're a member of it.
But they have to be.
Yeah.
Their allegiances too, especially within a Prince Hall canonical boundaries.
Yes.
Right? There's a difference, but I'm just talking specifically Prince Hall. Right? Not anything else. So the president of the Conference of Grand Masters, it has to, I mean, it would have to be something super egregious, even if, let's just say, because we've had instances where, I hate to say this, there's been bad stuff happen, like, you know, different.
I have a good example if you need one. I have a good example.
I have a couple, I just don't want to be.
And I'm not going to say, but a sovereign Grand Lodge opened a lodge outside of its territorial borders. Right. And you guys probably know what I'm talking about, right? Like that is obviously.
State starts with an L. Gotcha.
Yeah. That sovereignty was violated.
Of course.
You know, and I don't believe that individual was removed from office.
Not as a Grand Master, no.
But they definitely lost recognition, right?
Recognition.
You do weird stuff, we're not going to recognize you. And you need to overcome these things before we can even go back to the table and talk about it again. And what is the trickle-down effect of not having recognition? I go to that state and I want to visit. I'm not allowed to.
No.
Potentially.
I don't want to move off this point because I heard it. And I think that it's important. Who can remove a sitting Grand Master in this jurisdiction?
In this jurisdiction, it would have to be, and the only person that I know for certain is the president of the Conference of Grand Masters.
Correct.
Our jurisdiction now, that is a big thing, because what if our Grand Master, what if our Grand Master is, let's just say, he does something, he commits a felony, right? The body would then enact, we could have an emergency grand session, of which you need 7 lodges, subordinate lodges represented to have emergency session.
Yeah.
Right? And then you would have to vote to remove him based on his egregious act.
Right.
Right. And it's the thing where the Constitution is gray is it doesn't spell that out specifically. Now, if the Grand Master is just, let's just say for better lack of terms, wilding out, and he does something that maybe has ruffled some feathers to the point where the president of the Conference of Grandmasters has to remove him, then that would be a black eye on the Grand Lodge.
So we talked about a little earlier, we were talking about authoritarianism
Mm-hmm.
and that the Constitution allows for it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I just read, I'm not sure that that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about the idea of having something embedded in a constitution that would, be more specific around those powers. It's here. So the number 5, the second to last in the responsibilities of, or the duties of the Grand Master, says he's got to do all these things, but that nothing herein contained shall authorize the Grand Master to do other than carry out the expressed legislative action of this Grand Lodge in accordance with constitutional requirements and not otherwise. That's really interesting, right? So we talk about the idea that if during Grand Session, the body or the Grand Lodge makes a decision, that though the Grand Master can wipe it out, according to the Constitution, he's bound not to.
Yeah.
He's bound not to. He's bound to follow the will and pleasure of the craft as the craft makes its decisions. And so I think that's an important thing for people to know. Now, to your point, let's say he doesn't. Let's say the craft says they want to do something and they voted in, and the Grandmaster says, all right, good for you guys. I decide I don't want to do that way. I'm not going to do it. He then would be in violation of the Constitution as it's written today. And is that an egregious enough act for these 7 lodges to convene and then?
Realistically, no. It would have to be something, treason, murder, pedophilia. I mean, it would have to be something really, significant in order for him to be removed. That's just so.
Do we speak?
So superficial.
Is that written down?
Where's that? Actually, I'm a little unsure, and here's why I said it, because there's so many it's so many scattered instances of that throughout the Constitution. There's nothing specifically. I think next on segment 4, I'll come back with a little bit more deep dive just to give members article this, subsection that to kind of refer to, and that's good for them to know. Not that we want to remove the Grand Master, but you got
no.
You got to understand
the impression that we're talking about that at all.
Yeah, you got to understand the power of the craft, right? The power of the craft and the powers therein contained in the Constitution.
Yeah,
that's a real thing. This is not just window dressing. It's not eye candy.
Look, the second section of these, when you see the duties of what follows the duties is the powers, right? Mm-hmm. So the powers of the Grand Master are also laid out, but so are all of the powers, the duties and then powers of every officer in the lodge are laid out. We could argue whether they're clear enough or whether they, match the moment, but they are there, right? And I think that it's probably a great idea to have spelled out what penalties for failing your duties are, and then how those things can be enacted, so that again, the craft, if it's our craft, if it's ours, and if we hold the power, and we are said to, then we should understand what our duties are and what our powers are as well, right?
Both things are true.
So I'm gonna move to the next thing here. This makes me chuckle. I'm not going to read all the power, duties, and powers of all the people, but I am going to skip right on ahead to one of my favorite ones. Here we go. The duties of the Grand Lecturer.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, the duties of the Grand Lecturer do not identify his powers. They just talk about his duties. I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything.
No,
I know. I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything.
Article 5 or 15, section 1,
It shall be the duty of the Grand Lecturer under the direction of the Grand Master to visit all the lodges in the jurisdiction and to exemplify the ritualistic work, that there may be uniformity of action throughout the jurisdiction as approved by the Grand Lodge and not otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Section 2, the Grand Lecturer will ensure that each district deputy Grand Master is proficient in the work and in the lectures authorized by the Grand Lodge, and report his finding to the Grand Master annually. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd argue there's some vagary here, but there's some specifics. Right? It is the Grand Lecturer's job to make sure that we're uniform.
Standardized work across the board.
That's what I get.
Absolutely.
That's what I get. And that his arguably they're the Grand Master's officers, but under his direction
So
are the fingers of his hand.
let me give it to you like this. In this jurisdiction, the Grand Master appoints the district deputies, not the Grand Lecturer. Although they fall under the umbrella of the Grand Lecturer, he is not the one that appoints them. He is the one that is, I don't want to say responsible because the leader is always responsible, right? But he is the one that's going to govern them throughout any given Masonic year. But I can tell you this, digressing just a little bit, certain jurisdictions, and Justin can attest to this, is that other jurisdictions have assistant Grand Lecturers.
Yes.
Because you hear the duties and responsibility of the Grand Lecturer. What if you have 70-something lodges, 70 plus lodges in your jurisdiction? How can one person visit 70 plus lodges?
They can't.
They can't. So that's a little ambiguous. You do have district deputies that carry out the official visits that substantiate that, and then you make the visits, as humanly possible because people have jobs and real lives. But having the assistant Grand Lecturers, and this has come up recently, this does spread it out and gives you a little bit more diversity, more flexibility. Because one person, if you follow the duties in section 1 and 2, article 15, that's for anybody. I don't care who you are, unless you're Superman and you have a cape and you can fly to each lodge. Because in California or different jurisdictions, wherever, Oklahoma, or you're taking a plane somewhere, or you're driving 8-9 hours to go somewhere. So is that realistic? No. There is some vagary, but the specifics is this, and I'll flatline it, that the Grand Lecturer should adhere to the ritualistic acumen within the jurisdiction and standardize it. That is his job. Period. Now, there's different vehicles to achieve that, but that's his job, his duties, his real duties.
Sounds pretty point blank to me.
It is, but what I think what Aaron is saying is some vagary, and I'll let him expound on that. But I'm just telling you, I know a guy that knows a guy, right? That can speak to that. Getting some insight on that, it looks different.
But when I talk about vagary, when you guys hear me talk about that stuff, it's really going to be about the fact that I personally desire a lot of specific. I think that there are places wherein vagary is good and maybe necessary to give latitude for growth.
Flexibility.
Right. But there are places where in which the craft needs to have specifics, not just for the craft, but for the person who's in a specific job, so that they know what their job is. And then all the people around them know what their job is. And so we can have people in lanes and not have confusion around it, right? This person's job is to do this, period, and do it like this. And when we have that, when we're careful to craft that way, and you can do it in some, you don't have to use legalese to do it, right? Like you can make it so that people can understand and read it. I just think we need to do that.
Yeah, but here's where I would throw something back at you.
Yeah.
Let's take the military, for example, right?
Yeah.
All of us have been affiliated with the military in some way, shape, or form. We have SOPs that are not, they're shells and shoulds.
Right.
And these are men and women going to war against other countries to defend this country. Now, the SOP is not exact to save your life. We're talking about a constitution that's just a governance. We're talking life or death, and those SOPs are not written, right? And these standardized procedures are not written specifically. Why they're not written specifically is because situations in those, they change. And I kind of think that with the Constitution, that situations change because as we evolve, right, the way we did business 30 years ago is not the way we do business today. So how can a Constitution remain viable from 30 years ago? It can't. Like in the specifics, yeah, we could get specific and granular, but don't you think that would cause us to change the Constitution like every couple years?
And go through the process to do it, I think, is the bigger thing.
That's a hurdle. That's a hell of a hurdle.
It's a huge hurdle.
And that's like where I kind of was alluding to earlier, both with the legislative and the executive, and then, following up with jurisprudence. My understanding is that the Committee of Jurisprudence is designed to interpret the intent and spirit behind these laws, to include those unwritten laws at the same time. So I don't think it's as straightforward and as simple as black and white. And I think it's done that way intentionally. And I kind of agree with how it is because it's less restrictive if you are educating, you understand, the process of, how to engage in this governance system. And that's ultimately, what the discussion's about. How might we, better engage with our constitution or constitutions in whatever jurisdiction, and it starts with understanding these basic concepts, right? These basic concepts, and I find it interesting just here in the United States, right? And a lot of people know this that a lot of our founding fathers were Masons, right? And it's kind of ironic that we have the same system of governance in Masonry as well. Approaching it from that lens, you get a better understanding of who's got what power, who has what rights, and by what means do they have that right? And then when they're stepping out of bounds, as we see also in just in, how can I say this? As we see in the political landscape, today, sometimes there has to be those checks and balances to put things back in order. And that's what we're ultimately really talking about. Like, how might we be able to better understand the mechanisms by which we engage in order to bring forth the change, if that's even what we're seeking? I think we're really seeking just generalized understanding, right?
Yeah.
Of this thing. We're not seeking to change anything,
No.
but just to just get a deeper understanding and remove some of the fallacies that we may think are out there through educating.
A general awareness, right?
Yeah.
Right.
General
Yeah.
awareness. And also an empowerment. Once you know the thing and you have some levers to pull if you need to, then you can do that, right? All right. So we're almost done with this, and then we have a couple of things I think we wanted to talk about. So I'm going to speed through this. The next thing that was on here was the Grand Board of Directors, right? I'm just going to
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it's not necessary. So what I will say is they are a necessary aspect of our Grand Lodge, right? And they exist. Well, this is what I would say. I have opinions about what they are and what they should be, right?
Mhm.
Like I have an opinion that the Grand Board of Directors should be representative of the body, right? I have that perspective. I also have a perspective that I'm gonna say something that's going to be really dangerous, but I'm going to say it anyway.
I like that.
I think that our Grand Lodge is set up and set out in the Constitution to have different bodies within itself. You have the administrative, you do have a judicial, and then you have sort of a Congress, which sits out, in my opinion, our board of directors, right? And I personally think for those things to be effective, that they should be independent of each other.
I agree because I sit on the board of directors for a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And that board of directors has its own bylaws,
Yes.
its own constitution,
Yes.
right? And they are governed separately from the nonprofit.
Correct.
They govern the nonprofit with as far as the governance and how it should operate and keeping tracks of the budgets and things like that. But they operate separately from the nonprofit in the fact that they have their own constitution, their own bylaws.
And they need to. I sit on several boards and have sat on them in the past, most of which the board and the CEO, there's a wall between them because the board is there to, if necessary, sanction the CEO.
It's a conflict of interest.
Right?
It's a conflict of interest to have governance on both sides.
There is an instance where I am both the CEO of the company and also the chairman of the board. In fact, I'm the only member of the board. And this is a strategic move that is done specifically because I need to be, in this case, an autocrat. I need absolute control. And this is the way in which I have it. And there are some people who are bothered by it because I have there's nothing they can do. And I think where you have the judicial, where you have folks that are looking at interpreting the Constitution, right? They should not be told what the Constitution says by the administrative body. They should be able to do their job and do it freely. They should not be able to be cajoled or threatened or any of those things, right? But then on the other side, same. My opinion is that the board of directors must be independent so that they can effectively do their job, one of which is oversight of monies, right? That's a big deal.
That's the fiduciary responsibility of the board of directors. It is huge. It is huge in the organization, and they have to be able to separate that responsibility.
Yeah. And just listen, as I'm just going to say, and I mean this, I mean this absolutely. This is not a criticism of anyone. This is not a criticism of any current administration or past administration. This is just my perspective on how efficiency lives in governance, right? And right now, the way that our system, and Justin, please lean in if it's different elsewhere that you are aware of. Our system right now is muddy. It is muddy.
I mean, it definitely provides oversight of that process, but I think kind of what's most important is that is your continuity of your organization.
Yeah.
That is your tribal knowledge. That is they sit there for a long period of time, you know, and CEOs come and go, but in a perfect world, that board of directors there and can steer the organization in the way in a, you know, they're not getting into the weeds of the decision making. They're steering the organization in the way that hopefully the body wants to go. You know, they're the rudder adjustment. You're just making sure the ship, they're not getting into the weeds of the small decisions. It's providing the oversight, providing the direction.
Yep. So, I mean, look, that's what I have to say about that. You guys more to say about it?
No, I think that's really good though, to at least mention it to the individual member. But when you start talking about big, you know, the big picture, they're definitely a critical part of that conversation. We talk about the big picture and the long-term goals of the organization.
The ramifications of a shoddy board.
Yeah.
Detrimental.
You lose your continuity.
All three bodies, right? Like if any one aspect is not working, functioning properly, it's a problem. But if they are independent, then they could be set up to give balance or correction. So let's talk. We can make this quick too. Elections. How we elect people, right? According to ours, we use a ballot structure. The Grand Master has term limits. Nominations when candidates cannot attend are possible. We have nomination in absentia. So if Trey is wanting to run for an office and he can't be present during that election, somebody can nominate him and
proxy.
He'll go through it as a proxy.
But there's a caveat.
And our Constitution states that you cannot, as an elected officer in a Grand Lodge, be considered by proxy.
So
you cannot.
Here it is right here.
It has a caveat, but go ahead.
No.
The caveat is it a medical problem, medical condition, if I remember what I read?
I think I have it so I can look.
Combinations of absence, Section 8.
Section 8. Article 5, Section 8. Is that it?
Yep. So it's a little bit lengthy, but should a member of this would be seek election, re-election to an office of Grand Lodge, but is unable to attend its annual communication due to a serious illness or hospitalization, both of which require a physician, or due to death of an immediate family member, wife, son, daughter, brother, sister, mother, or father, or due to mandatory presence on his job, that his name may be placed in a nomination for an elective office in the Grand Lodge, provided he has presented a letter to the Grand Master and the Grand Secretary informing them of his intentions, and in the case of a medical problem, the letter must contain a reason of his absence with the signature of a licensed physician. All requests must be signed in the requester's handwriting, read in open grand session, and voted upon by show of hands. The majority will be sufficient to determine approval. So there's a couple caveats in there.
That's very detailed.
Yes.
You know, we talk about some of the not so detailed stuff. That's very detailed. And that leads me to believe at some point, but it was something that happened and they didn't know how to deal with it. And they're like, crap, we need to draft this up because this problem arose. And what do we do?
But
that's usually how things get fixed, right? You don't fix it being proactive like Aaron reading it. They get fixed as a result of an issue that it had nowhere to go with it.
Because you can't hamstring a person based on, well, there's no proxies, but life happens. You know, obviously it has to spell it out, but that's what I was talking about. There's things that change constantly, and there's situations that delineate where you can't write it specifically all the time. So you literally have to make it a little bit vague just to get the point across. But something like this is a pointed thought.
Look,
It's about the spirit of the document.
what
Yeah.
what constitutes written generally?
Well, so written for me, my opinion, my interpretation, by saying explicitly handwriting, right? So that requires a wet signature,
Mhm.
right? It
This
can't be a
this
digital, it can't be an email, it's got to be a wet signature. And then further, by it saying being received by the secretary, that indicates that it is a official postmark date stamped document that's mailed in prior to grand session.
Is that
All right.
feasible?
right, and it's not. This has come up. This has come up recently where, brothers have sent an email and they thought they in their mind that that's written because that is a form of communication now, right? And we're talking about current day. Remember, I used the analogy of 30 years ago and today, and this was kind of written in a 30-year-old vernacular where now I'll send an email and I could digitally sign that email if
Right.
I turn it into a PDF. Then
Right.
that signature can be and will be my exact signature.
Okay, so this goes further. It says here, in order for us to have a ballot, it has to be a written ballot. Listen,
Yeah, but again, that's ambiguous too.
it is because, like, if we're using digital voting machines, or like, what if it's on your phone? Is that still written?
Right. Because again, you talk about balloting, period. This year we're using electronic means, but if we look at the Constitution, that's not it's not necessarily written in the Constitution that we are allowed to use electronic means. That was the prerogative of the Grand Master and the Deputy Grand Master.
I think for this specifically, I think this does withstand the test of time in the sense of when you're talking about written. Like, okay, to me, that just means you just can't get up and say, "Hey, I nominate this person," and you all vote on that person by show of hands. Written to me just means it's on a form, piece of paper, computer, whatever
A
that may
name,
be.
a name is identified.
Exactly. That's
I
what
agree.
written means to me.
That's what it means to me too. But we live in a
Yeah.
world where somebody's going to say, "Listen, this is not in our lodge. What we do is we take the minutes and then we email them out for the body to read them, so that we can say that the minutes have been read or received and read by the body, and we don't have to read them during the next meeting because it can get long, right? It can get monotonous, and we have had past masters say, "No, nope." Constitution says
Reading of the minutes.
must read the minutes. You must have them written. They have to be written in hand, and they must be read.
And
Yeah,
I would agree with them. And that's my personal opinion. I would agree with them only because I've seen legislation. I've seen legislation in a certain Grand Lodge specifically address that, and it was a vote.
Why do you think it's addressing that? What is the reason for it?
I just think because it was ambiguous in the code. Reading in the minutes, like okay, define reading in the minutes,
Right.
right?
So if you get the minutes before your meeting and you've read them, and the question is asked, has everyone present read the minutes? And they say yes. Are there any changes that need to be read into the minutes? Is there some disagreement about it? No, none. I will entertain a motion to accept the minute.
And I personally agree with.
Still got to vote. We still got to vote in a minute. And here's the thing: is what does Chapter 4 of Robert's Rules of Order tell us about making a motion? Anybody can make a motion if accepted by the lead. But I'll digress. Trey, go ahead.
No, to that point of reading of the minutes, if we go back to not everybody, and this is not today, obviously, but not everybody could read, right? As they were
That's fair.
so to read out loud, that's a time honored tradition, specifically regarding our minutes, because that's how people were able to understand. So I think that there's some things in there that are done intentionally to maintain the spirit, and I think that that's one of them. Similar to our dress code, right? Like I think that is something that is a time honored tradition that we strictly. It's dang near a landmark, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I digress.
Well, it's spelled out in your code,
Yeah.
right? It is spelled out in your Constitution code, whatever you want to talk about. It specifically, I remember that part of it. Like it specifically addresses the dress code.
Yeah.
Talks about it. All right, so I'm going to move on. We good on elections? We know how to do it.
Yeah.
That's some
Done
good
pretty much
stuff.
everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, this I'm excited about this. I forgot I put this in.
I feel like you're about to throw a curveball.
Yeah.
Constitution. Clearing common confusion. We've been talking about this a little bit. The Constitution controls where the text speaks. Article 2, Article 3, Article 5, Article 15, Article 16, right? Custom helps. Custom being these time-honored traditions. Only where the Constitution is silent, however, you must not elevate time-honored tradition above the text. Period. Period. And then proficiency.
Oh boy.
As we've talked about proficiency a lot.
Oh boy.
Well, I'm not gonna get into
That's very jurisdictional too. It's very jurisdictional.
Yeah. Be another 2 hours.
It is because the Grandmaster, and we've seen it in recent times, right? We've seen it within the last 3 Grandmasters. There's been edicts that have come out that have spelled out what proficiency looks like, and it's been different each time. At the prerogative of the Grandmaster and his ability and or autonomy to do an edict, he can spell while he's in the seat what he feels proficiency should look like. Now, if I'm being honest, if we want to do this the right way, we could expound Article 15 for the duties and responsibilities of the Grand Lecturer. If I'm being honest, like, and if we wanted to make it specifically, because let's just be honest, the Grand Lecturer should have a pulse on what the lodges are doing because of the deputies in most cases, or the assistant Grand Lecturers. In my opinion, again, it's just my opinion. Constitution it's what it is, and we follow it to the letter, right? The best we can, anyway, because there's some shells and shoulds. But if we wanted to make that the Grand Master, whoever that is, in whatever case, would then take the input from the Grand Lecturer to execute what proficiency looks like.
I think this is my.
I'm just saying.
I agree. Yeah.
It's just an opinion. It's no bearing on likes, dislikes, wants, or needs, or whatever.
I feel like there should be a minimum identified as far as proficiency is concerned, and whether that's your obligation, great, or if you want to go on top of that. I'll tell you how we do it here. It is the minimum of the obligation, and the master alone, not the consent of the craft. Master alone is he's the only one that determines suitable proficiency. Master alone. The guys on the sides, they can provide an opinion. The master and the master alone is the only one that makes that determination. And I kind of like it. It gives you the minimum. It gives you the minimum requirement, right? It gives you the minimum requirement. It consists of at least X, and this guy alone. So you don't have.
That's how we do it in my lodge.
You can gripe and complain and moan on the side about when you went through 40 years ago. That's great. But only the guy sitting in the East, he's the only one that makes that determination. And I like it. It's clean, and you don't have as much sideliners.
That's how we do it in our lives. This is where we like authoritarianism.
And well, here's the thing, and I'm going to say this because this is like my current read, and I literally just started there because I finished the Latin Theory. It's a book called How to Read a Book. Now, and it's fun. It sounds funny, but so far, great read. I read through the intro while I was sitting there getting the car washed. And the author talks specifically about elementary schools through high school and college, how we're never taught properly how to read a book. And this is true. And then our comprehension of said book. Now I parlay that to this conversation. When we talk about proficiency, are we really learning the work? Are we just reciting the work? Again, if you want to go on Webster's, I'm saying, what's the requirement now? If you go on Webster's definition of proficiency to be very coherent and I guess more functional in what you're doing, to break it down in layman's terms, are we just reciting the work? Are we understanding the work? Because then that varies the level, and then that will break down the levels of what proficiency looks like. Because Dustin talks about the first section, second section, obligation, right? The very base, that's the bare minimum, right?
What you end up with as your craft is going to be very much determined by that question. If your proficiency is that somebody can come in and read from the book the obligation, and that's proficient, what you're going to get, your life's going to look like that. If it is that the person can learn to regurgitate it, but not be required to understand it, that is going to be what
But see, our Constitution, this is ambiguous, says to perform. Right? What is perform? I can read it and perform it, but does that make me proficient? The unwritten rule is that we memorize. But what if we just spelled it out?
Right.
Memorize the words.
goes back to what a past master is, right? We know
Right.
the time in the chair creates at least some opportunity to be proficient
Some.
because you know what the job is. Part of proficiency is knowing the job, understanding what the thing is, right? And being able to, when you talk about performing, perform the job to do it.
Mhm.
Not talk about it, but to actually do it, right? And so I think you have that Master Masons program. I think it's designed to create proficiency beyond the obligation
Mhm.
as a Master Mason.
And I can tell you, and I won't be very specific, but I can tell you this: that has picked up steam recently. There's been conversations with our leadership and great suggestions.
Can I do something real quick?
Yeah,
I just want to close this constitutional corner out so we can talk about it.
yeah, we're good.
Good.
Oh, I thought we moved on.
Yeah, I thought so.
That was your constitutional.
Oh.
That was constitutional corner segment 3.
Oh, there we go. All right.
Well, thank you. If you didn't know it was over, it's over.
And you know, for the viewership, yeah, we're gonna end. I think we're gonna talk about a couple more things, but it has.
We started about 20 minutes late, so
We did. And again, it's needed, right? You can talk hours about the Constitution and never really skim the surface. But as far as what I was saying is, I've had a change of heart and a change of, I guess I've changed my outlook. And having conversations with our leadership, I got some really, really insightful suggestions on the 2-year plan.
Yeah.
And I had to look at it, I had to get it from a different perspective because I was only thinking about it from one perspective.
yeah.
And now that I got a different perspective on it from our leadership, I actually agreed. And I thought, wow, that was,
I would love to hear that.
yeah, we'll talk about it offline.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, when we hit stop, we'll talk about it offline. But it was just, I think the point is this, and I said this more times than I care to repeat again, but I'm gonna say it anyway, that we just forget that first lesson in masonry. That humility, because sometimes we get to a point where we don't want to take inputs, and I'm guilty, right? I think anger, bitterness, whatever you want to call it, all that gets in play, cockiness, whatever, bravado, and you stop taking input.
Yeah.
And sometimes, whether we like it or not, our leadership's input is invaluable. Sometimes we take it for granted. I guess what I'm trying to say. And so I was able to sit back, have a moment of clarity. And that was a really good, and I came home to my wife. I was like, that was really good input. And I never thought about it like that.
Perspective is everything.
It is everything, because when I thought about it, I was like, those lived experiences, you can teach knowledge, but you can't teach experience. And I'm only a certain age, and our leadership, they're a little older, so their lived experience is more than mine. And I'll be honest and be very transparent. I had to come to grips with that. And it wasn't a bad thing. It was like, damn, that was a hell of a suggestion. And I modified it slightly.
Sure.
To alter the suggestion, and I think it's picking up steam. And that's a blessing.
Yeah.
That's great. We're talking about proficiency,
Mm-hmm.
and we're talking about how that potentially affects the character of an organization.
Yeah, but Justin just said a perspective. I think everybody's perspective on proficiency it will be different.
It is different. Yeah, it is
because it's like what Justin said. When I got raised 40 years ago, it was this.
Yeah.
When I got raised, it was the 2-year plan that we had to follow. That was non-negotiable. You had to do things like walk the 3-5-7 as a fellow Christ. These are certain things you had to do. You had to recite what the Bible verses meant, not just the obligation, which is in addition to all that other stuff.
Right.
But is that fair? Is that fair, or to put on somebody who maybe not capable?
Okay. Wow.
I would say no. That's not fair.
You know what I'm saying? And that was a perspective I got. I didn't even think about it like that. Yeah, I didn't even think about it like that.
Let's ask something difficult, right? Because it begs the question, one, if older guys, if people much older,
Mhm.
people maybe generations ago felt it important to do these things because maybe they felt like they were trying to protect the character of the organization, right? What it looked like and what it was. It is, look, I come from Texas and the Midwest, and then
Way different.
on the East,
Way different, bro.
right? But hear me out. I don't mean in masonry. I mean in life,
Period. Both of
right?
them.
And I can tell you that the way that systems were handled, talking to the older people in my life and how they spoke about the older people in their life, especially speaking to African American systems.
Mhm.
Somebody once said to me, I was talking about the nature of a building, of some buildings that we have here in this jurisdiction, and they're not in great shape, and they're falling down. I was like, man, we need to figure out how to get some new properties and lift up the ones that we have and do better and be able to invite people from a different walk of life to this because they won't otherwise come to this. And the guy said, listen, that's all we've ever had, man. We should be proud of it. And I was like, ooh, you've ever had. Because I speak to my past and the people that came before me, I know what it looked like. It didn't look like that, right? And so they could read and they were held to a higher standard. And frankly, look, man, the Boule, the older the fraternal organizations, the Divine Nine, but back then,
Play was the first before the Divine Nine.
Masonry, I can name a ton. Jack and Jill on a social level, right? There was a velvet rope. It was by design, not meant for everybody. And so if you couldn't read or if you couldn't understand the work, there might be another organization down the street for you, but it wasn't this one, right? And so on danger of sounding like an elitist, what is the organization you want?
That's true, but again, hear the perspective. The perspective that was given to me is this. What if a brother joins and all he wants to be is a master mason, has no desire to do anything else but be a master mason? And we know quite a few of those brothers. Is it unfair to hold them to the same standard that we hold everybody to?
What if a brother wants to join a engineering guild?
I know, but we're only talking, we can say the what ifs and the hyperboles, but we're talking specifically of brothers that only want to be, I'm just giving, this is perspective. I had to sit back and hear the perspective and digest it mentally. And I thought, he's right. They're right.
100% get it.
Yeah.
And to me, it also, my mind is begging the question, what is it? What is our organization? Is it a social organization?
I don't think it needs to be defined by Grand Lodge jurisdiction. I think that can be determined by the individual lodge, and I think that it should be. I think that it should be defined by your lodge. I talk about my lodge here. There's only 10 to 15 guys.
Yep.
We don't want more than 20 members. Why don't we want more than 20 members? Because we want a authentic Masonic experience where everybody has a shared vision, and what is important to one is important to all. And when you have more than that water gets diluted a little bit.
So that's the culture you set.
And the other one, it's all service oriented, right? Yeah. It's all stuff in the community. It's all because that is what those members are passionate about, So in one lodge, ritualistic work is very, very well done to the point where people visit because they want to see the work performed the way it's supposed to. And the other one, hey man, it's not the best work, but those are some hardworking brothers in that lodge. The focus is different.
I think that's because this has been a conversation in my head and amongst a small group of brothers over the last probably 2 weeks, right? And I have fallen on the what for me is a new understanding and maybe reality that has to be lodge specific.
And it should be. I think it should be. And I think that we need to get away from, I just think that it's dangerous for us as members to say like they're practicing masonry and their masonry is not really masonry. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's dangerous to label. And it took me a while to figure that out because I didn't understand that. When I came in, I was only a member of one lodge and I only knew what I knew, right? I only knew the lodge culture of the lodge that I was only a member. But as I've traveled and I've seen some different, there's no one size fits all to what we do. And that's okay. And I think we should embrace that.
You too.
We stop poking each other in the eye.
I agree with you on that wholeheartedly. So then the question to proficiency from the Grand Lodge standard perspective must then be a minimum standard that could be adjusted upward by any individual lodge.
And that is what I like about here, right? The minimum is X, determined by X, right? Now, in the lodge that's very ritualistically strong, boy, we bring in, I don't want to say we bring in a certain type of guy, but I think a certain type of guy is drawn to the culture, shared culture of our lodge. As a result of that, we have some outstanding ritualists. So a guy that just got raised, the very next EA degree that he attended, he gave one of the 3 main lectures at the end of the degree, right?
really?
And you
That's
know why
awesome.
he did that? Because as a part of his proficiency, in addition to X, which he was required to, he also learned Y. So he went above and beyond, and in doing so, we now have an asset in our lodge to where if we need a guy to perform such lecture, he knows the work.
But the 2-year plan does that.
Yeah.
Right? It absolutely does that. But I guess to the point I was trying to make is I had to look at it, I had to take some input on it, some constructive criticism, because not everybody is going to want to do the 2-year plan.
No.
If you make it mandatory, then you start to isolate brothers that are good brothers, but they just don't want to be more than what they are. And to Aaron's point, we have to set the bar as an organization. We have to set the bar higher, or we could set the bar higher, right? But every individual lodge, regardless of what bar we set, is going to be different.
You're going to create an obstacle.
It is like I think if we set it too high, people are going to feel it's unattainable, and then the lodges are going to start to I guess have mutiny a little bit, more or less.
I think I'm in agreement with this. There's something bothers me about it a little bit, and that is about the uniformity of the organization on the whole. And again, it comes back to what the thing is. There are organizations, all kinds of them, all over the place, right? And they're national organizations that set a standard for each of their chapters. They have to be the same.
Yeah.
Right? Their standard is this, and you're not going to do less than that. And if you can't do the thing, then you can't be a member of the organization.
And I think we do that to a certain extent. You know, the ritual is what the ritual is.
Right.
Lodges close in form, they open in form. Degrees are pretty much the same jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There's minor one-offs, you know, but I think that the ritual, the ritual is what makes us Masons. So we have to be very careful with that. Right. Yeah. Not to water it down too much, because that kind of makes us who we are. Like the ritual is the cornerstone.
And then what about the ritual matters?
I mean, the lessons, right? And this goes back to proficiency. You know, if we have a guy who's meeting with his mentor, his assigned mentor on a weekly basis, and he has demonstrated that he's doing the work, and he comes in and he just can't wrap it. Like, we had a guy in our lodge that he was a veteran, TBI, right? He had traumatic brain injury. He just can't do it. Great brother, not his strong suit. Our Grand Lodge here, they have in the code, the master can open the lodge for the express purpose of evaluating proficiency. So what did we do? We didn't bring that dude up at a stated meeting when every Tom, Dick, and Harry is there so that he embarrassed himself. We brought in the bare minimum amount of officers that we needed to open the lodge on a Saturday morning. We came in here, brother, we're going to take care of you. And guess what? We didn't chase that dude away. He's at everything. We took care.
So I can tell you, I've had the experience at least a couple of times now, right? Where if it weren't my decision, the past masters would have deemed those brothers to be not suitable, right? Period. But I knew first of all, I knew these brothers personally. I know their heart, right? I know their heart. I know that they work. It just, in one of the cases, this guy has a very difficult time regurgitating words, right? If you asked him what it meant, if you asked him the spirit of the obligation,
Yeah.
he'd tell you. And he could tell you in probably clearer terms than somebody who could give you every word for word.
Oh yeah.
But he couldn't give you the word. He just couldn't do it.
I mean, on the flip side,
Another guy was he's got a stage fright. He just can't perform it in front of other people.
and that's what you can, the spirit of masonry, we're there to improve ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And we are providing an opportunity for him to hopefully overcome that at some point in his
Right.
life. But
Well, for me, I deemed both of them proficient. And I've seen one of them, he is a sound Mason, but he's a social Mason, right? And that's what he wants to be. And I have no problem with it. I have no quarrel. The other one, man, the fact that he was able to have that grace has become he's going to make one hell of a worshipful master one.
No, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like
No,
your point. Yeah, your point, Aaron, like you deem these guys proficient, but in the spirit of proficiency, if we're talking about whatever the spirit of proficiency is, they wouldn't be proficient. Let's just say,
true.
if I fast forward and say that this plan is the law, right? This is now written into law. We're holding them to a standard that with Justin's guy that has TBI, we're setting a standard and a bar that they can't overcome.
Yeah.
Now it's going to discourage them, and they're good brothers. The guy with the TBI, great brothers. What you're talking about is a great brother.
Is it could be the grand lecture? No, and that's okay.
That's why I say for me, like there's something that bothers me because my brain works in multiple different ways. There's one way in which I am curious about what a thing is, right? And how it's defined and how it shows up. I also live in this thing, right? And as I said, I came down to this for me and understanding that there's a specific thing that I want. I can have it. I may have to design a lodge to have it.
And you should. That's the answer to that question. And but how do you open a new lodge? Oh, wait, it's written in your code or your constitution, right? So some brothers don't even know that you can find 14 other dudes that are on the same exact wavelength of you as you and do it. And you should do it.
Right.
And we should encourage members to do that because you create a lodge culture that you want. You don't like your lodge, find one. And if you can't find one, you make one. Yeah. And there's been a lot of success here of doing that, to the point where they're becoming special interest lodges. We're talking about opening a Star Wars lodge. Really? We're talking about they're going to open and close and form and do those things. But guess what? When they're done, they're going to get out their models or dolls or whatever they're going to do. You know what I mean? But it's a bunch of guys and that's their thing. There's an outdoors lodge where they go camping. It's only 4 times a year, but they go camping. They have dispensation to open and close wherever they are at. So they go out, they go camping, they go hiking, they go do these things. But there's some real power there of finding that common thing within, we're all Masons, but finding something next level to kind of build upon that. There's some special power there.
I absolutely love it. I've seen it in other jurisdictions where there are what are clearly specialized lodges.
And you can open a lodge. I just think that guys don't know how to do it. Crack open that book. You'll figure out how.
Listen, learn that concept.
Crack it open. Find some guys.
Yeah, we've hit some highs today, and I'm glad that some of this stuff has come out. I'm looking forward to the 4th iteration of this.
More specifics on your Grand Lodge officers.
Yeah, I think we'll circle back on the removal of the Grand Master. I just think it's not to invoke that thought, but it's to have knowledge of if it happens, what do we do?
Right. To Justin's point, you may love your lodge, and hopefully you do. You might be in a lodge that you love and decide that you have a feeling, or you might have a few people in the lodge, if you guys feel a certain way about a thing, this thing is more important to you. Knowing that you have power, that you have rights and power that are given to you by this organization and this constitution is huge, right? It doesn't mean you're going to do it. Like knowing that there are things that can, I want to be careful how I say this, knowing that the grandmaster can be sanctioned, maybe it's important just to know.
Yeah,
It may affect how you move.
yeah, it's just a thought. I mean, again, knowledge is power. So we definitely want to bring that, and I will be.
Can't play the game if you don't know the rules.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll be conscientious to bring that data in a couple of weeks, or 2 3 weeks when we get back together. But definitely, I personally want to thank everybody for taking the time. We really dove a little deeper today. We always do anyway.
We always do.
It's nothing new, but I think, and I know for a fact that brothers need this platform to understand things like the Constitution and the Code, and what it means and how it varies and what proficiency looks like, because we can't hamstring people to a standard that they're not capable of fulfilling. It's not fair. I mean, it's just not. Again, that's the perspective I had to look at it from, and it's just not fair. I was making it where it was just like, well, I did it. I was really that old guy at that point, and I had to really take a step back. Like, well, I did it, so why couldn't blah 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 do it?
And I don't even think you need to get that from leadership. I think that as a Mason, you can get that on your own just by getting out there, seeing what dudes are doing, talking to some different people, getting exposure to what, because I was raised a certain way, and Trey knows all about this. Like, we would, and I feel guilty about this, and I don't do it anymore, but I would look down in a certain way upon Masons that weren't ritualistically proficient. I've completely changed that as a 180 now. I really have. Like, I'm more concerned these days that you're living your life as a Mason rather than being able to regurgitate the crap in the book.
Yep.
That's what's most important to me, because I know a lot of guys are ritualistically proficient and they're crappy human beings, terrible human beings. I wouldn't trust my kids.
You need to talk about that on one of our next podcasts. What's the difference between being a ritualistic Mason and being an actual?
Yeah.
Versus speculative.
To write a book about it.
Because it literally doesn't make you, what's the moniker of Mason? Say good men and make them better men. But we're not going to make them better men by having them memorize a bunch of words that they don't even know the meanings of. Anyway, I digress.
And me personally, like, I learned through learning the ritual, and to a certain extent too, right? Because it's forcing me to be like, I'm just saying this. Maybe I should figure out, like, what am I actually saying? That's just my personality. Like, I'm not going to say something if I don't know what it means. Maybe that will encourage it in some brothers. And I think, Raul, that's definitely the case for you. You gain understanding through that memorization. In all cases, it's probably not universally true, but I think there's something to be said for that. The ritual, like I said before, the ritual is what makes us Masons.
Yeah.
The ritual, and we need to guard it. We need to safeguard it. And there needs to be a proficiency level when it comes to degrees and opening and closing. I do believe that, but I think individual proficiency can be defined in a lot of different ways.
Should the ritual change?
Could it change?
Did it change, or should it change?
Should change.
No, because we talk about time-honored tradition now. I'm gonna say no, just from my perspective. It shouldn't change. I think that we can modify it in certain areas.
Yeah.
Maybe we can clean it up grammatically in certain areas, but then you take away from the spirit of the tradition, because it is written in an old English language. So that's why I say memorization doesn't help you understand the words in the ritual.
Right. My question was just, I'm just poking the bear. We have a new ritual, relatively speaking. Like, we don't have the same ritual as the Grand Lodge of England.
No.
The ritual was changed for us.
From a physical, it was broken out into 3 books. Yeah, so the Constitution, it changed. Well, it changed.
Oh, I don't mean modern. I don't mean recently.
Yeah, the Grand Lodge based the Grand Lodge based their ritual upon X. And there's a couple of different sources out there. Right? There's a couple of different sources out there. It depends on when your Grand Lodge came on board. It depends if you're free and accepted Mason or ancient free and accepted Mason, because I'm a member of one of each, and they're very different. I wouldn't say they're very different, but I would say that there are some cool additions here in the AFAM, like the prologue to the degree, which is optional. You don't have to do that, but basically you give the candidate an overview of what is going to transpire and what he could be potentially looking out for ahead of
Mhm.
time before they're in there doing it. It's cool. It's really cool. It sets the stage, and it's optional. Some lodges do it, some lodges don't. But you're setting a stage and you're giving some context before it starts, and it's interesting.
Look, there was a point in time that I was super interested in the ritual, Masonic ritual in general, right? And in the research, I was, man, there's a lot. Like, Canada's ritual is very different from ours. Like, all these rituals are very they're some of them are very different, just different in minor ways, right? But really interesting.
Yeah.
Really,
You know what's funny about it is that you can read those, but in a lot of states they're coded. Why do we code rituals? We can go on to that another one.
right?
That'd be another one.
I'm not doing that with you.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that crap with y'all. But anyway, for the fans, Trey, any parting shots before we get out of here?
No, I guess so. Yeah. One, it's been a pleasure to, again, this is about education and exploring the ritual and understanding governance and how this organization is governed. And that's all in which we hope that you take from this more specifically, and everything else is just icing on the cake. And again, these are all of just our opinions, our own individual opinions, perspectives, our own lived experiences as well. And the hope is that you would gain some insight from that. So yeah, that's my parting shot.
It's a good one.
I think for the next segment, and it's not to embarrass a brother, but I think collectively we should try to find a young brother just to join us next session. Kind of give him the read ahead and just put him in a scenario where he has studied this portion of the Constitution and then get his take on it, because that perspective is what people need. Like, we've been around a little while as a collective, but what about the brother that just came in that can actually come on here and talk through his lived experience of what he's seeing from the Constitution right now? Like, how much perspective would that give the audience? I think it would give them great perspective.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
So just a thought. I think we should work toward that. Getting, look for a brother, one of our lives to jump on here, a younger brother. Somebody that literally is just coming to Mason within the last year.
Yep.
Maybe even the last 2 years. So just food for thought, and audience, look forward to that. Be looking out for that, because that'll give you young brothers some real world experience. No nonsense. This is one of your peers saying what his lived experience is by looking at the outline and going through the Constitution, and then get his perspective on what he takes away from what he just read.
Yeah.
That's hella important. That's hella important, because I think about it one way, Aaron interprets it one way, Justin and Trey interpret it other ways. What does this young brother say?
Yeah.
He's new. He's the future of the Grand Lodge. What does he say? So looking forward to that, man. Appreciate y'all as always.
All the time.
All right.
Yep. The real Mason.
Until next time.
It really happens.